Okay, folks, welcome to the June 2025 meeting of the North Jersey Astronomical Group. I'm Vice President Mark Zadarsky. I'm very pleased to present Stan Honda, who is a excellent and well-known landscape and sky photographer based out of New York City, out of the Amateur Astronomers Association of New York. And if you want to, thank you. Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
And thanks, Mary Lou, for the invitation. This is great.
We're glad you could come.
Definitely. And yeah, as Mark said, I'm a photographer. I'm a professional photographer. I'm based in New York City. My background is in photojournalism. I work mostly in newspapers and wire services for my career. And in 2014, I was working with Agency France Presse. That's the sort of the French equivalent of the Associated Press. And I left to do a couple of independent projects that I've always wanted to work on. One of them is about the night sky. And the other projects that I've been working on since then deal with the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. And so I have a writing partner in Los Angeles named Sharon Yamato, and we've been working on these projects for about almost 30 years now. It's kind of amazing how long we've been doing this. Both of our families we have a history with our parents' generation that my parents and their families were rounded up and incarcerated when World War II broke out. And so it's part of our family history, but we also treat it as part of American history that's not really talked about very much. We just completed a project about these early detention sites where Japanese Americans were sent to, mostly in California, called assembly centers. And so we created a website called forcedassemblycenters.com. And it's just a guide to all these different detention sites and where they were and what exists there now at the site. A little bit of history, and it kind of tells you what's there in the present day. I shot a lot of pictures at each site with showing what's there. There are a lot of memorials that survivors have raised money and put memorials in these different spots. And we created it as basically a guide to these centers that oftentimes people have relatives who might have been there and they want to know how to get there, what's there, what they can see. And so we created that. What I'll be showing tonight are pictures of mostly the night sky and in some not very night sky, which I'll show you in a little bit. And I titled this in the firmament, and I looked up the definitions of firmament. And in the mid 13th century, there was a definition that talked about the expanse of space above the Earth where the heavenly bodies move. And so that's sort of what us as amateur astronomers are interested in. And so it's sort of the area that I'm interested in. What I do is, like the title slide here, I do a lot of essentially what's landscape photography at night. I go out and I look for interesting foregrounds, interesting landscapes that can complement what is also up in the sky. If you want to look at other pictures that I've done, I have a website called stanhonda.com, and you could follow me on Instagram and Facebook as well. On my website, there's a bio page that just tells a little bit about myself, and I have a little slideshow of pictures that I've news pictures if you wanted to look at some of the pictures that I shot when I was working with Agency France Presse. And so what I'll go through tonight, I think, are different variations of a lot of the images that I've shot, and kind of showing you the techniques that I use, and then also just kind of trying to make people aware of what's up in the sky, and how that we could, if we controlled the artificial lighting a little bit more in the areas that we lived in, we could actually try to see more up in the sky. And I do a lot of I try to incorporate the sky with foreground objects, things in the landscape, for a couple of reasons. One, to put a place on the picture, and just a picture of the sky, you're not really sure where it is, but if there's a unique foreground, that'll show you a place, a location where it is. This is a lava fields in the crater of the volcano of the Haleakala National Park on Maui, and it created this really interesting silhouette. And I often go to national parks because, especially out west, the area within and outside of national park are often protected from a lot of development, and so the amount of artificial light is very low. The illumination in this picture comes from a rising crescent moon off to my left, and it illuminates the foreground plus everything in the Grand Canyon. This is from the North Rim, looking south in the early morning hours. This is taken in June, and in places like New York City. I live in New York City, so the city itself becomes the landscape, and I'll show you different variations of those pictures. And what I do really is I don't use artificial light. I mean, unless I'm in urban areas photographing things like city lights, but out in the wilderness area, I don't use artificial light. I kind of use the moonlight to illuminate the landscape and provide some depth to the picture. Pretty much everything you'll see here are single frames, except for there's a couple of composites of the space station, an eclipse picture, and a panorama example that I'll show you. But I pretty much stick to just working with a single frame. I think it really preserves the integrity of the scene and just the relationship between the sky and the light on the landscape. One thing that I think we're all aware of as amateur astronomers are the artificial lights, especially in suburban and urban areas, that can affect our view of the sky. Often when I'm out, especially in dark areas, I'll kind of look around and see if there are any light sources, and I'll show you just a few examples of what I've seen when I'm out there. This is from a trip I went to the Big Island of Hawaii in October of last year. I stayed in a house in a small town called Naalehu, and it's at the very southern end of the Big Island of Hawaii. And I was kind of surprised. I went out the very first night in the backyard of the house, which it borders a golf course. So the grass you see in the foreground is actually, I think it's the first hole the fairway as you're going down the golf course. So, and there were some fairly bright lights in the houses across the way, but there was a spectacular Milky Way above. The town itself, the housing area was pretty low density, but and the light in this picture, it's brighter than it actually looked to my eye. The camera picks up more light, but the sky looks kind of like what it looked like to my eyes when I went out into the backyard there. So despite I think the lights across the way and in different parts of this town, which there really weren't too many, you had this pretty spectacular sky. One reason, of course, is probably that as you're looking in this direction, looking south from the house, you're basically looking out over the Pacific Ocean. And so for another few thousand miles, there's nothing. There are no other islands, no other light sources. So that really keeps the sky pretty dark. I spent some time in Haleakala National Park on the island of Maui, and I remember photographing from a viewpoint that looked down onto the island of Maui. And so you see the light from all the different towns, especially with a little bit of cloud coverage, sort of like this little dome of light. But I was pretty surprised. In this picture, you could see zodiacal light on the left-hand side of the frame, quite bright. To my eyes, it was quite bright. You could definitely see it about an hour and a half after sunset. And so you could see the zodiacal light despite how bright it was over on the island below me. And a few other examples. I go to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado for a night sky workshop almost every year, and there are a couple spots from the very high altitude overlooks, where you see this bright glow to the southwest or to the southeast of the mountains, and it's actually Boulder and Denver, which are pretty far away, about 35 and 50 miles away from Rocky Mountain. This location happens to be at about 12,000 feet, so you are pretty high up, and you're looking down toward the lower elevations, and so you actually do see this glow from Denver. But despite the glow, the sky itself is pretty dark within the park. And in Death Valley National Park, Las Vegas is 100 miles away, and so you could still see the glow from Las Vegas, the greater Las Vegas area in Death Valley. The rest of the park is actually quite dark, and again, even with sort of this glow on the horizon, see how many stars you could see up in the sky. I'll go through a few different examples of pictures that I've taken over the past few years. One thing I often do with some of these light domes on the horizon, this is in a New Mexico State Park called City of Rocks. And these are actually these giant boulders. They're about 30 or 40 feet high. It might not really show the perspective in this picture, but the boulders, I think, act as a great way to hide some of the light domes on the lower, kind of toward the right of the frame. You can see a little bit of glow on the horizon, and a couple of the towns are fairly bright, but the boulders help basically hide the glow. And the sky itself is quite dark inside the state park. And I was with a friend, and so we would often set our alarm for about 2 in the morning, and then so we'd wake up and try to get some pre-dawn pictures. This is the landscape being lit by the crescent moon that's rising in the left of the picture. So we sort of waited for this moonrise to happen. And the great thing about photographing with a crescent moon is that the moon is bright enough to light up some of the landscape, but it's not so bright that it washes out a lot of the stars in the sky. So there's this nice balance between the two, and often the exposure in the camera is about the same for the sky and the ground, with a little bit of light on it. I spent about a month in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park on an artist in residence program, and a couple of nights when the moon was fairly large. This is about at my notes here, about a 76% illuminated moon, and so it lit up the landscape quite well. But you could still see the stars. The sky itself wasn't terribly clear on this night. There are a few clouds up there, but the air itself was pretty clear, so the stars shine through pretty nicely. But the moon does a nice job of illuminating the lava flows that you can see in the park, and the terrain is pretty amazing. When you look at it, you see all these different formations, different shapes within the terrain, and then there's a specific kind of tree that actually grows out of the lava. So you see a lot of lava fields that they're basically rock, but there are these trees growing out of the rock. And that same night, I kind of explore around. I've been experimenting with focusing very close on objects, and just seeing what that does to the photo. And again, this is a pretty bright moon, which helps with the landscape. The lava itself is quite dark, from anywhere from very, very black to sort of a reddish color, and it absorbs quite a bit of light. So with that size of moon, it provided enough illumination for the foreground. One thing that I often do when there's a pretty large moon out is I might go out just to see what I can get, see what the moon illuminates, but also see what kind of effects I can get. I know as the moon gets bigger and bigger, our tendency is to not really go out at night. since the moon, a bigger moon tends to wash out a lot of the stars. But I did this, I was at Yellowstone in National Park, and this is Old Faithful, one of the eruptions at night. And so there was this 75% illuminated moon, a pretty large moon. And so I put the moon behind the Old Faithful and created this amazing backlit view of Old Faithful as it's erupting. This is a fairly long exposure, I think maybe about 8 seconds. So the water gets very, very blurry, but it created this interesting shape. And in the background, of course, you see a lot of the lights from the lodges and the visitor center that surround Old Faithful. But it was the great thing about the Old Faithful is that they have these predictions of times when the geyser is going to erupt. So they're usually pretty accurate within about 10 minutes or so. So you just have to wait. And so I knew it was coming. So I was able to sort of scout out a location beforehand and just to see what would happen. And it turned out to be, I like the picture just because there's stuff going on, and there's sort of this wild water and steam being thrown up in the air, and you can still see stars up in the sky. One experiment that I've been trying to do and that actually works usually in early September is to do a vertical panorama. If you tilt your head on the side, you can see how it sort of appeared in person, where I started on the right-hand side of the image is the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So I started at that level, and I just shot a series of pictures going up to the zenith, and I turned the camera around and did the same, going from zenith to the rim of the canyon behind me. And then these were stitched together in a panorama program. And so I created this long image showing the Milky Way from horizon to horizon. Happened to be quite clear that night, so it worked in this case. And I made quite a large print and hung it vertically, and it looks a little bit better here on the computer screen. It's bigger as you go horizontal, so I put it that way. And I began to look at the various constellations and objects in the picture. So I started to do some annotation, and I was just going to do a couple, and then it got out of control, and I ended up kind of working the whole day and finding all these different constellations. And Jupiter's in there somewhere, or Jupiter and Saturn are right near the center part of the Milky Way, right near Sagittarius. And then I think Andromeda, M31 is there. So it's quite an interesting view of the constellations, and just a different view of the sky. So a lot of people ask, well, what do I do? What do I photograph when I'm home, when I'm in New York City? Initially, you might think, well, there's not a whole lot to take pictures of, but we could, if it's clear, we could still see the moon and sometimes the sun, and we could see usually the bright planets and a few stars here and there. This was a total lunar eclipse, the one in November of 2022, I think. And from Queens across the East River, you could look across and have this pretty panoramic view of Manhattan. And I was looking at some planning software, and it looked like at some point the moon, this was pretty early, well, pre-dawn, so this is probably maybe about 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. The moon would be starting to set toward the west during the total phase, and it would line up with the Empire State Building. So I try to choose recognizable landscapes, and in New York City, there's quite a number of them. So this, to me, this made an interesting photo. You could kind of combine this astronomical event, the total lunar eclipse, with an urban skyline that you don't normally see associated with a lot of astronomy things. A full moon is people like a lot of full moon photos, and photographers like to go out and shoot them. This was taken from New Jersey, from a place called Eagle Rock Reservation in West Orange. And from there, it's a pretty nice view of much of Manhattan, especially lower Manhattan. And from the park to lower Manhattan, it's just over 13 miles. So it's a pretty long distance. But that enables you to use a very long focal length lens and get both the buildings of lower Manhattan and something like the moon in the same picture. So this is a moonrise that ended up being one of the astronomy pictures of the day a few days later. And at this magnification, in terms of the focal length of the lens, the moon is rising fairly fast. You can actually see it moving as you're looking through the viewfinder. So it's an interesting experience. We got pretty lucky on this particular day. The sun had already set, but the sky behind me, of course, to the west, is quite very orange in color, and so that reflects off of the glass of the buildings. The center building, the center is the One World Trade Center, and so that's sort of matched with the orange color of the moon as it was rising that evening. Something that I actually could have shot from Manhattan. I was with this friend in Hoboken, New Jersey. We wanted to get the moonrise that evening, and then we stuck around for the occultation of Mars, and this was in January of this year. And so this is a sequence of images, 26 frames that I combined together, and Mars is taken at 1 minute intervals. And so I just combined as Mars was going from bottom toward the moon, and then emerging from the other side, going toward the top of the frame. And it made sort of for this interesting view of what Mars and the moon were doing that night. And again, this is something that easily you could see from, as long as it's clear, you could see from an urban area with lots of light pollution, because the moon itself is pretty bright. Mars was pretty bright that night as well. So it made for an interesting photo. And oftentimes there'll be an interesting moon set out near the Statue of Liberty. This is taken from Battery Park in very lower Manhattan. You get this view across the water of the statue, and depending on the month and the season, the moon will set in the vicinity. And the great thing about a place like Battery Park, it's quite wide, so there's you could move around and line up the shot as it's happening, and so that leads to interesting views like this. I live on the east side of Manhattan, and for me, it's actually about the same walk to Central Park as it is to the East River. There's a park called Carl Schurz Park that's on the East River, and has this very nice view of the Triborough Bridge, and so looking across the water this is probably about maybe a half hour or so before sunrise. So there's the moon and some planets, and I did an annotation. So there's 3 other planets in the picture: Venus, Saturn, and Mars. And so to me, it's a way to show how I could take these kinds of photos, the moon and some planets, in an urban setting like New York City, which can be fairly bright. Of course, as sunrise is coming, the sky is starting to get light, so you're fighting with the sky getting brighter. But at this time, the 3 planets were fairly bright, so you could see them. And the moon was in a nice phase, so it made for a nice arrangement in the sky. And I think this was just a few months later. Many of the planets, and let's see my cursor. There's planet here, one here, one here, and one here. So there are at least 4 planets lining up in the morning sky, taken from a very similar angle as the previous picture. And the planets turned out to be Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and Saturn. And this also was chosen as an astronomy picture of the day. And of the group of pictures that I had picked as astronomy picture of the day, most of them actually were taken in and around New York City. And so a lot of them, of course, that you see are taken from fairly dark sky sites. But I think it's nice that they pick pictures from urban areas, I think, to show people what you could see in the sky, even from an urban or suburban area. The one thing you could also see is the International Space Station, and of course in New York City you could see a lot of stuff flying through the sky. The vertical or the diagonal dotted line is the International Space Station. This is a composite of a total of 450 frames, and so only the kind of the central part of the series is the space station. I think I'm doing 5-second exposures here, and there's about a 2-second interval between each frame, and then I layer these the same way that I would put together a star trail. You see a lot of airplanes, obviously, taking off from both, I think, Kennedy Airport and Newark. This is taken from the reservoir in Central Park, looking south, well, looking more southwest, I think. And so the space station was going from bottom to top. The airplanes are all flying around, but you can see these short arcs, different colors here. Those are all stars. So those are star trails that you could photograph from the very center of Manhattan. So it's when I was looking at all of the frames that I shot and did a initial composite, I realized that you could see these star trails rather clearly. It was sort of amazing that you can actually do that. And it makes quite a busy picture, but you sort of see what's going around in the sky over this is about a total of about 55 minutes of exposures, including the space station flying, going overhead. And I chose this particular night because the space station was going to roughly go from horizon to the horizon behind me, almost in a straight line. And so for me, that it would have fit into one frame, and it went into one vertical frame, and I thought that'd make a fairly dramatic picture.
What's the horizontal thing with the red bit on the right?
Is that right here?
Yes, what's that?
Yeah, that's an airplane.
That's an airplane.
Yeah, airplanes have dashed lights because of the navigation lights. Sometimes there'll be like one light that stays on all of the time, but they're often flashing lights depending on if they're either the navigation or the landing lights that come on. And all the other the lines that are sort of mostly red or flashing red, those are airplanes. And the solid lines that basically are all concentric are stars that appear to be rotating around Polaris. Another International Space Station shot that I did was this one. Now I'm looking south over the reservoir. I'm looking north. I'm at the south end of the reservoir in Central Park, looking north. So this is the space station going overhead, and it was taken on the evening following the launch of the SpaceX Crew Dragon ship, which was the first. It was the first crewed test flight of the Crew Dragon spacecraft, and it was actually the first orbital spaceflight launch from the United States since the final space shuttle mission in 2011. And so that made it significant. A bunch of us were out, I think, taking pictures, and you could see the space station pretty easily. And following behind it was this much fainter streak, and that turned out to be the Crew Dragon capsule. It looks like it's following along, but it actually came about a minute later as it's catching up to the space station. So I did this composite and also did a little magnification of the streak itself. And a couple of days later, this was selected as an astronomy picture of the day. And this is at Jenny Jump. And there was one evening I went that the station was going to go basically from horizon to horizon, pretty bright, especially as it reached the center of its path. So I did a composite here, and there was almost a full moon, which is right in the center of the frame, making this big blob, as you can see. But despite the full moon, it showed it pretty well, and there were quite a number of stars in the sky as well that you could see. And then you can see a lot of people who have set up their telescopes for viewing that evening. This is probably a Saturday night at Jenny Jump. And from a wilderness area, I could take a whole different approach to doing the space station. In New York City, in urban areas, I have to take shorter exposures just because you can't take a very long exposure. You run into exposure problems and just brightness problems of the space station. This is from Acadia National Park in Maine, and this is a 5.5 minute long exposure. So I opened the shutter as the station entered the frame, and just kept it open until it reached the bottom of the just above the horizon. And so that's 5.5 minutes. You could see the essentially star trails being formed. Polaris is, I think, either right here, right around here, and you could see the Milky Way going diagonally across the frame. The town along the horizon at the bottom of the frame is Bar Harbor, and despite the very long exposure, 5.5 minutes, there isn't a whole lot of light that actually built up in the picture. So the town itself is fairly small, but I think it seems like they might be a little bit more aware of their lighting being very close to a national park and wanting to preserve the skies there. So eclipses are a great thing. Of course, the next few pictures are taken during the day during eclipses. And to me, they're interesting. This is my very first total solar eclipse in a place called Svalbard, which is an archipelago of islands that's very far north of Norway. It's at about, I think it's 78 degrees north latitude, so pretty high up there, on an island called Spitsbergen. And so the Spitsbergen and the Faroe Islands off of Iceland were the two bits of land that the March 2015 eclipse was going to hit. Otherwise, you'd have to be in the ocean somewhere to see the eclipse. So I joined a group that was going on a tour, and it was pretty spectacular because it was one of these eclipses where you didn't have to crane your neck and look up into the sky. At high noon, the sun was about 11 degrees above the horizon. So you basically just had to look toward the horizon, and you could see the eclipse pretty well. For me, I like the wider angle images of eclipses. It tends to put it in a location, and you could get people in the picture like this. The landscape was pretty spectacular. It was just ice and snow. So it was this amazing, I think, landscape and super clear skies that morning, which really helped. But super cold also. Just before the eclipse happened, it was about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So I had pretty much had on every piece of clothes that I had packed. We were standing out there for about 3 hours. They had these nice warming huts, which I raced into every half hour or so. But of course, as the eclipse approached, everybody wanted to be outside to see it. And this is from but that was also the very first astronomy picture of the day that I got. It was from that solar eclipse. And this is the April eclipse in last year, April of 2024. I was with some friends in upstate New York, and we decided that Quebec was a better place because it was better in terms of clouds not coming over the eclipse site. As you can see, there are a few clouds along the horizon anyway, but it turned out to be quite a nice area. We found this lake where there were a lot of people. And again, I sort of like to stand back from the crowd so I can get some people in the photo. And this is one of my favorite photos from the day. And I had sort of planned it out, and this is a handheld. I knew that I had a few cameras set up on tripods, and I wanted to be mobile to try to get an interesting angle if I could. And this just happened to work out where the planning worked out pretty well, and I was able to get, I think, an interesting foreground to go along with the sun and the moon. I had another wide angle camera set up to do a sequence like this. And for this composite, I chose the sun and the moon about every 5 minutes. I selected a frame, and so you can see the progression of the eclipse as it goes toward totality, and then from the final partial phases. 2024 was great for me. That I managed to see 2 solar eclipses. The second was a partial eclipse when I was in Hawaii at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. I had actually gone there a little bit early before October 2nd when the eclipse happened to scout out different locations. And I found this really interesting location and had this idea in mind to get this tree and the eclipse. This is part of on that day, there was an annular solar eclipse in South America. And I noticed on the eclipse path maps where it started in the Pacific north of the equator, and in Hawaii, the sun was going to be rising partially eclipsed. So I got there well before sunrise to scout out the location. And then, so this is the sun's, it's only a few degrees above the horizon, and it was a pretty striking view as it came up above the ocean. And I threw this in at one end because this is from the annular eclipse of October 2023. I was with some friends in northern New Mexico at Chacoculture National Park, which is an amazing national park in northwestern New Mexico. We were almost on the center line, and it's sort of mesmerizing to look at this picture because the symmetry is me. It's kind of amazing that the moon is almost directly in the center of the sun. So the annulus, the circle that you see through the filtered lens, is almost a perfect circle. It's sort of almost mesmerizing to me to look at.
Good timing.
Yeah, we picked a great spot. I mean, we literally were only a few hundred feet from the exact center line of the eclipse. So other things that are up in the sky. I know that I actually missed some of the aurora that was here last year. This is from 2023. I was in Yellowstone National Park. I hadn't read anything about any solar outbursts or anything. I was photographing in one of the areas that I like to photograph. I was by myself, and I looked toward the north in the park, and I see this kind of this glow that extends pretty high up, almost 45 degrees in the sky. And I was thinking, I know the area around there pretty well, and I know that there wasn't a town that was within about 50 miles of the park at that point. And it wasn't a very big town, so there's no way you could make a glow like that. I thought, this is kind of strange. It's sort of a very pale glow. And so I took a picture of it, and this is one of the first pictures that I took. And I thought, oh man, this is nuts. This is an aurora. So this sort of lasted, it was very bright for 10 to 15 minutes. And then it moved in different directions, and there were lots of I think green aurora that was actually moving from east to west in the sky. So it made for this almost like a bizarre display. And I only saw 2 other people at this location I was at. They had they had heard about it, and so this was about 45 minutes after it started. They came into the parking lot and asked me about it, and I think they took a couple cell phone pictures and then they left. So it was, so I was by myself for probably at least an hour and a half shooting this. The night of the total solar eclipse in Svalbard, we saw this amazing aurora display. That I had signed up for these aurora watching expeditions. We would go just outside of the town, and so this was about near midnight of the night of the eclipse. So 12 hours earlier, we had seen a total solar eclipse, and then now we see this kind of this spectacular display of aurora that extended. This is a 14 mm lens on my camera, a Nikon D810. So the field of view is quite wide, and it extended well beyond the field of view of the lens, both horizontally and vertically. Back to Hawaii volcanoes, since I was there early planning for the solar eclipse, a friend had texted me and called me. He said there's this comet, and I had read about comet Tsuchinshan Atlas, and I wasn't really sure how visible from the northern hemisphere it would be. And he had texted me a picture that was taken from the top of Mauna Kea, where the astronomy observatories are, that someone had taken. And he said, I think you could see it from Hawaii. So I went out the next morning and before dawn, and I managed to, I think, photograph it with a couple of different lenses. In Hawaii, of course, there are clouds exactly where you want to take a picture. And so these the clouds were going by, and I managed to, there was this gap of literally just maybe a minute where I could get a few frames in, and then these clouds are going left to right in this frame, and so you can see those clouds on the left are going to hide the comet within a couple of seconds, and which is what they did. But managed to get one clear shot. About a week or so later, in the park, I was able to get, I think, more interesting pictures. This was a pretty big moon. This is really about 3 days before full moon. So the moon itself is a waxing gibbous moon. It's pretty big, but the comet was at least from Hawaii, I think, because of the lower latitude, it was quite bright. You could sort of see this, see the antitail as it's extending down from the head of the comet. And again, the clouds are shifting around, and I actually didn't know if I was going to see it for a while. And then all of a sudden the clouds broke, and it created this, I think, a nice effect with a few clouds and the landscape being lit by a pretty bright moon. After a few days after full moon, of course, the moon rises later and later, and there was a date where it looked like the moon wasn't going to rise until about 50 minutes after the end of astronomical twilight. So I had this window of a few minutes where I could shoot both the comet and a pretty dark sky, mainly the Milky Way, and it actually turned out well. So I was able to get the Milky Way. Venus is the bright object in the lower center part of the frame, and the comet was sort of moving in the direction of the Milky Way each day, so it was getting closer and closer. But there was this great window where I could shoot without interference from the moonlight and get both the Milky Way and some pretty bright stars. So I just happened to be in Volcanoes National Park as this comet was getting brighter and brighter. So it was great to go out, and when it was clear, you could see the comet pretty easily with the naked eye. And I think being that far south, the Big Island is at 19 degrees north latitude. So I think the comet itself was a little bit higher above the horizon than at a higher latitude, but also it gets darker a little bit earlier in Hawaii. So it had that maybe an extra few minutes of darkness that helped out a lot. I've been experimenting with focusing very close on objects like plants, geological formations, and just letting the sky, the stars go out of focus. And I like the effect. I've been actually trying this since about for about 10 years with different lenses, going to the different areas, the different parks that I go to. And one thing it does is that it accentuates the colors of the stars pretty well, and also the shapes of constellations. The fainter stars sort of blur and blend in the background, where the brighter stars show up as these bright circles. And I mean, you could recognize Scorpius and Sagittarius here, and then of course the central part of the Milky Way. I think it sort of adds some depth to the picture and a different kind of perspective that you don't normally see. So this is from a trip I did in April to the City of Rocks State Park in southern New Mexico. The great thing is that there are these great desert plants that lend itself to really interesting foreground objects like this. But also with when the moon is rising, the sides, these huge boulders provide really interesting look at sort of the texture of these rocks and these geologic formations. There are these super tall and spindly plants called ocotillo plants, and just found in certain desert areas. And they're sort of amazing. They're just like arms reaching up into the sky. And for me, they make really interesting foreground objects. And for a lot of pictures that I take, I often eliminate the horizon. I'll just sort of concentrate on something like a plant or an object, but also including the sky in the background. Somebody else wants to do it? Okay, you got it. And there's a closer view of some of the ocotillo plants. I'll end with a little promotion. I do these night sky landscape photography workshops in Rocky Mountain National Park. And so the next one I'm going to do is September 19th to 21st of this year. It's a 3-day weekend. It's a 3-day workshop. So there'll be 2 nights of photography in the national park. We go into the park and to a couple of different locations. And Rocky Mountain's a great park to do night sky photography. And then during the day, there'll be a couple hours of in-class instruction, and then we carpool into the park for the photography. So you could either scan the code on the screen there to get more information, to sign up. The Eventbrite page has a lot of information about a little bit the details of the workshop, or on the events page on my website, which is stanhonda.com. Yeah, there'll be a link as well to the Rocky Mountain Conservancy site, and it's put on by the Rocky Mountain Conservancy. And if you sign up to be a Conservancy member, if you're not already, you get a 10% discount on the workshop itself. So if you're interested in learning how to do this kind of photography in a national park setting, take a look at the information and sign up if you want to. Mary, I could take questions if people have questions.
Yeah, well, first, thank you. It's Anybody in the room have a question? Don?
I have 10 questions per picture, so I'll try to pick up the couple.
All right.
Like, how did you do each one? So you talk about some of those are composite, some of them are one shot, but your exposures are so perfect. And in places where I could never get even lighting. So let's take just the extreme, the moon and Mars. You said Mars was pretty bright, but the moon's way brighter than Mars.
Yeah.
Do you do a lot of post-processing to get your exposures right, or do you just plan it?
Well, it's a combination. It's a combination of knowing how to expose in the camera, but then also knowing what you could do in the image processing part of it.
Okay, yeah.
And so with something like the moon, people often, well, for general photography, people often use the light meter and then see, well, what does the camera say is the right exposure? but there's no such thing as a right exposure. There's the good exposure for that particular subject. And so the moon is quite bright. It's when you look at it with your eyes, it's sort of this very, very, very light gray. I mean, people might say it's white. And so in those pictures, I essentially overexpose the moon by about 2 f-stops, so that it looks overexposed on the picture that I'm looking at on my computer screen. But I'm also increasing the exposure of Mars at the same time. But I haven't blown out any of the highlights on the moon, so I could recover the detail on the moon pretty easily when I'm in camera raw. I'm working with a raw file, which when you're shooting this kind of pictures, you have to shoot a raw file. With a raw file, you can easily recover it without a whole lot of work. And then what I do is I just tone down the moon slightly without touching Mars. You could do that in the image processing software. And then that way Mars still remains bright in comparison to the moon. So then the brightness probably is a little closer than what you might have seen with your eye, but then it produces an image that's closer to what you would have experienced when you're out there.
Normally, you would have taken one exposure for the moon and then an exposure for everything else, and then you compose it. Here you kind of do it in one
You
shot.
could do that, but this method is easier because but essentially, you really don't have to do that, because Mars itself that night was pretty bright. I think it was near opposition. And so it's probably about as bright as it can get. And you don't want a super bright Mars in comparison to the moon, because then it looks a little bit odd. To me, that sort of the level of brightness, Mars versus the moon, was about what we were seeing when we were out looking at it. And it was very, very easy to just select the moon, bring down the highlights a little bit, and then I reached a point where, well, this is the moon, the brightness of a full moon that you usually see it, but Mars is still fairly bright in comparison. So then I didn't really have to do anything else to the photo.
One other question,
Sure.
and I'll. Do you ever use a star tracker? Because you've got pretty good.
Every once in a while, I'll use a tracking mount. Most the pictures that I showed you tonight were all just on a tripod. I usually try to aim for about 13-second exposures. Even with
That was my third question, so.
Yeah. Even with a pretty wide lens, you even at 15 seconds, sometimes with the super wide lens, there's a little bit of star trailing. If you look I mean, every picture taken without a tracker, there is some star trailing, because you could put together all of these pictures that I make, and you can make a nice star trail. So there's obviously some trailing. At the scale that you're seeing it on the screen, even a very large print, the stars look pretty sharp. I mean, they look sharp enough. There isn't a long streak. Not the bad news, but because I'm shooting a relatively short shutter speed, around 13 seconds, I have to go to a pretty high ISO. So I'm shooting at 8,000, sometimes 10,000 ISO for a lot of these pictures. But because I have a good exposure, the things like digital noise is not a problem. I mean, if you bought a camera within the last 5 years or so, you could do the same thing, and you won't have a problem with digital noise.
Wow.
Because you have a good exposure in the camera. So we'll come back to you, Don.
Yeah, I'm letting go.
Is it possible to go, it's not so much a question, but it's just a realization. We go back to that image, I think it was your panoramic view with
Oh, yeah.
Andromeda and Milky Way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, all the ones stitched together. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen a better representation I'm serious.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing.
So absolutely
You need to make
amazing.
a poster of this, solid it up.
I made
Right.
a large print, which looks nice.
A representation of, I've seen pictures of, this is you on the ground and there's Andromeda in the sky, even as a small piece and a little piece of the Milky Way, but you have the Milky Way bulge, the landscape, and Andromeda. So you have the perspective of being inside the Milky Way, seeing the Milky Way, still realizing the Milky Way is here compared to the Andromeda. Looking at the Andromeda, a galaxy out in the distance, the next closest large galaxy, and in about 5 billion years, these two are going to merge.
Right.
This picture really needs to be publicized more and something written up along with that. Because I don't think I've ever seen that encapsulated in this way before. And I've got to commend you on that. That's awesome.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mark. That's a good point. There are two galaxies in this photo, or at least two in this
Oh,
photo,
yeah.
two visible ones at least. Ours, the Milky Way, and Andromeda galaxy. In early September, at least in the northern hemisphere, at the latitude of the southwest, the Milky Way lines up this way, where it will start at a horizon and go to zenith, and then go to the opposite horizon. And so the window isn't very wide. I've actually done this in later September and it hasn't worked. And it becomes too diagonal. And then you have instead of being able to make a panorama where it's almost straight, it's at a diagonal and then it looks kind of odd. But early September is good, and it's just, I think this is 7 frames as you go right to left in this picture, and just stitched together as I would stitch a panorama. And again, I was surprised when it was all assembled that it looked this way. In my mind, I was thinking it would look something similar, but it was very surprising actually to see it actually work like this. And I think it helps because the horizons are sort of kind of recognize them as horizons with the trees and things, but then they're fairly simple, so it doesn't distract too much with the picture. And there is a lot going on there. There's Saturn, Jupiter, there's Andromeda, there's a lot of the familiar constellations that.
Hey, could you skip to that picture? Because that's what amazed me. I think to your point, Mark, that you had annotated the constellations. And
Oh, yeah.
even just
Oh,
getting
yeah.
that perspective of the constellations, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, like I said, I was going to do a couple, and then I got carried away and kept going because it was sort of fun to just figure out where things were. And then you see a little of if you go toward the edges of the frame, you see how it's a wide angle lens, and it kind of distorts the familiar shapes of the constellations. But it was sort of an interesting study in seeing where things were, where things lined up, and also how big some of the constellations really are. I mean, usually you see the main stars in a constellation when you're just out there looking at it. It's like Cygnus really spreads pretty far out, farther out than I had realized. And other constellations are like Sagittarius kind of just sprawls, and you think it's just that those stars in the main part. But it was interesting to see that. Any questions on the Zoom?
Yeah, I have a question. It's Mary. I actually have 2 questions. What software processing did you use? Processing software.
Yes, Mary.
For this picture or for in general?
Well, in general.
Oh, in general, I use Photoshop.
Okay.
The raw pictures start out in Camera Raw, and then I work on them a little bit there, and then put them into the main Photoshop program.
And did you said that mostly the pictures that you showed us were just 1 frame?
Yeah, except for the panorama, some of the eclipse,
Okay.
the space station pictures. they're all single frames. That's the approach that I take toward the night sky photography is I don't do any of the stacking or anything. To me, it's a lot of extra work. And extra work on the computer. I'd rather be out taking pictures. So, and if you get a good exposure in the camera on a single frame, you get a nice picture that depicts what you're close to what you're seeing with your eye. And to me, that's the way that I like to do my work is to keep it as natural as possible and to keep the look fairly natural so that if somebody goes to the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or the Southwest, then if they look out at a night sky, they might see something close to what I had photographed. You look at Instagram and other social media and you see a lot of very, very colorful night skies, which to me is very unrealistic because if you go out, you see this very kind of a subtle sky, and that's what I'm trying to get across in this picture.
Thank you. And the other question is, when you said you were in Maui, the national park in Maui, what did you call that light that was like on the left side of the picture? What did you call that?
Oh, the zodiacal light.
Spell diable? What?
Zodiacal, like zodiac.
Oh, okay.
It's a light. You could see it in the northern hemisphere. You could see it in the after sunset in the spring, February to March, or before dawn in the fall, from September to October.
Mhm.
And you're essentially looking at the plane of the solar system. It's called zodiacal because it's along the constellations of the zodiac, and the zodiac constellations are along the plane of our solar system. And so along that plane, there's apparently a layer of dust that's lit by the sun. So the sun is now well below the horizon. It's after astronomical twilight, or it's before astronomical twilight in pre-dawn. And so you're seeing these dust particles illuminating by the sunlight, and you can only see it in very, very dark areas. Like if you're in an area that you think is dark and you can't see the zodiacal light, then it's not as dark as it could be. Very dark areas, you could see it, and especially if there's no light pollution around, it can be quite striking to see it. You see this, it's a triangular shape light from going up in the horizon, and it can be quite striking. It's really amazing to see in person.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, there was a comment in the chat. Linda really liked your presentation. She writes, your work is so beautiful. New York shots reveal the hope of the universe, even with all that light pollution. Thank you so much for sharing. Excellent presentation. Planets and plants.
Oh,
I guess you don't like those photos.
Right. Yeah, well, thanks very much. And the reason I do I just like to take photos, so I try to do as much in New York as I can when I'm at home. And I think it's in one way it's nice to show people that you can go out in a place like New York City and you could see things in the sky. You could see the moon, you could see the planets, you could see the International Space Station. You can see some stars. And in photographically, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of things that you could do with a camera that you might have thought was impossible, that you couldn't do. You could, like, who knew you could do star trails in the middle of Central Park? So I think I'm trying to show that, and I think just trying to show the universe out there in perspective with the neighborhood around us. I mean, whether it's a city, whether it's a wilderness area, things like that. And I think that just makes it a little bit more accessible for people, knowing that they can go out and they can see a lot of things, even though they are in a pretty bright area. Sure, Don.
I love the moon pictures, Manhattan. So you had one from you said you took from Eagle Rock, and then the other one,
Yeah.
and you said you took that Eagle Rock one with a long lens. The other one from Manhattan, was that with a longer lens also? Because your moon looks so big. And when I take a picture of the moon, it always looks so tiny in perspective, you know, what you normally see with the eyes. Some of the beginning ones, yeah, you had,
Oops, all right. Back through these. Well, it's all really, it's all about just perspective, where
yeah, that
this is with a little bit less than a 200 millimeter. And so what I'm trying to do is get the skyline as well as the moon. I can't use a 600 millimeter lens here because the moon will be very big and I'll get maybe the spire of the Empire State Building, and that's about it. From the position I was standing, you can't get both.
right,
From 13 miles away,
Right.
you can get the moon
Right.
and you could get the World Trade Center, which is probably, I don't know, what is that, 1,200, 1,300 feet high. And so it's just a matter of what can you fit in that angle of view of your lens. And so if I was across the river in New Jersey, I couldn't get this picture because I'm too close to Lower Manhattan. I would have to use a wider focal length lens to get the buildings,
right,
which makes the moon smaller in the image.
yeah.
And
I
then
just
so-
love those moons, they're just fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's sort of, the perspective changes as you change the distance between you and the subject matter. The moon is never going to change. You're never going to change the distance between you and the moon.
Right.
But the foreground can change as you move. If you're at a specific, if you don't change your location, the perspective of every lens is the same, whether it's a wide angle or a telephoto. But as you change your location, change your distance to the subject, then the perspective starts to change.
So that's at Eagle Rock Reservation, right?
That's at Eagle Rock.
Eagle Rock. So this is on the first watch on Mount, essentially, volcanic. We're on the same range. What I guess what I'm saying, that's just a few miles to the south. If you look out the window here, you might actually get a very similar perspective. 'Cause we're actually in line with that ridge where we're sitting right now.
Okay, yeah, Eagle Rock is great because it's elevated for one thing.
Mhm.
And then I think it's maybe about 400 feet in elevation or
Yeah,
so.
about that.
So
Just a
then-
little bit less than that, but yeah,
Yeah, so then from there, you're actually looking down toward Manhattan,
right.
which is almost at sea level. But it's also an unobstructed view because you're high above New Jersey, or
Right.
high enough above New Jersey. And it's a pretty clear shot to Lower Manhattan and also the sort of the midtown area,
Right.
depending on where the moon was. And this was when was this taken, Marilyn? You have to remember. I think this was in June. Probably one of the June moon rises. And so
Right.
the moon happens to rise at that azimuth where
Right.
from Eagle Rock, you could line it up with the buildings in Lower Manhattan.
Right. So, and the buildings are blown up because they're 13 miles away. You have to magnify them to get this perspective, and that's why it looks so large in relation to the movie.
Yeah, this is the full frame. I haven't
Right.
cropped it or anything. So
Right,
it's actually a 500 millimeter lens with a 1.4x teleconvert. So that makes it a 700 millimeter lens. So the moon, like if I were a mile closer, I wouldn't have this picture because the building would start to get cut off at the bottom.
right.
The moon would be the same size because the moon is not going to change.
Yeah, that's like infinity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the foreground will change because of your distance. Keep going, Donna.
I'm good, I'm thinking of signing up for the workshop.
Oh, yeah, Council Rocky Mountain, it's a great place. We always have fun there. Last year we saw moose up close.
Wow.
So that's always fun.
Hey, Donna, I'll talk to you about that workshop, okay?
Yeah.
Very, which,
All right, I'll ask one more question. I was gonna hold off, but your color perspective, the orange move, do you manipulate colors?
No,
Just
I-
weren't they even?
Yeah, I don't really manipulate the colors much. What I do is I try to think of what it looked like when I was there. And also, given the fact that the camera records things that are much different than what we see or experience with our eyes. What you see with your eyes is a combination of your eyes and your brain. Your brain is doing image processing as we speak. You're looking around and it's correcting for a lot of things, color balance for one thing. I'm here in the classroom, it's a fairly dark room. I'm seeing something that I probably couldn't recreate with my camera. I could see Mark's face very clearly, and I could also see the screens on the wall behind him very clearly. I could see other people's faces, not super clear, but enough. And so meanwhile, my brain is adjusting light levels, color levels, things like that. So I try to kind of think of what it looked like and try to recreate something that's close to what I experienced when I was there. At this time of the evening, the sun is set. The camera picks up a lot of blue in the sky and the atmosphere. I'm shooting through a lot of atmosphere, like at least 13 miles and then another 240,000, right? As you're going out to the moon. So you're shooting through a lot of atmosphere. The moon is quite orange. And if you see a moonrise on a clear evening, right above the horizon, the moon is very orange, and or it can be. And then as it gets higher and higher, it turns wider and wider. So I try to maintain the colors that were there. I actually desaturate a lot of the color in the picture because sometimes the digital sensor will not really enhance it, but create a saturation that doesn't really exist in nature. When you're out in nature a lot, you realize how subtle a lot of the colors are. There, with some exceptions, there aren't really super bright colors out in nature. And then a lot of things are very subtle, and so I try to keep that look in the picture. All right.
Also, Beatrice, since you have the moons in the full phase, wouldn't some of that purple, not the purple that's reflected off the buildings, but the background purple also be the Earth's shadow rising along with the moon?
Yeah, I think this evening was a super hazy. The air was very hazy, so it was basically sort of haze from the horizon up.
Gotcha.
And you're right that you do, especially right as the sun is going below the horizon,
Right.
you do see that Earth shadow going across, and it's usually a few degrees. And this picture from bottom to top is probably just maybe 2.5 or 3 degrees
Right.
for that focal length. So, and the shadow extends maybe about 5 to 7 degrees. So it's well within that range there.
In that range. So many things got captured in that one shot.
Right, it does look natural. It really does look natural, but the colors are so perfect that, yeah.
Well, the glass of the buildings really reflected the sky. I was kind of surprised how bright the reflection, because I actually didn't think there would be that much, but I think because of the haze, the sunset behind us was very reddish, orangish.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just created the reflection off the glass, which ended up being perfect for this picture.
See that from this range, not just Eagle Rock, but even out here sometimes. If you look out this window here, you'll see the same type of glimmering just after sunset off the buildings, just like that. And depending on color hue is different depending on the atmosphere, which is very true. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
All those things got caught in the same picture. The more I look at it, the more I see. It's pretty great.
There's a lot of stuff going on in there.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, everybody, for the invitation. If you have any other questions,